The gunshot that killed Fiona Calloway's husband didn't just take his life, it shattered something inside her that she hadn't known could break. And 6 months later, she still hadn't found all the pieces. She stood behind the bar of the Silver Spur Saloon in Tascosa, Texas, wiping down glasses that were already clean, her movements mechanical and precise. The year was 1881, and the frontier town bustled with cowboys, cattle drives, and the constant promise of violence that hung in the air like dust. Fiona had learned to navigate this world with her head down and her heart locked away, speaking only when necessary, smiling never. The other saloon girls whispered about her, called her the ghost woman, but she didn't care. Caring required feeling, and feeling led to breaking, and she'd already broken once. She wouldn't survive it again. "Another whiskey," a gruff voice called from the end of the bar, and Fiona moved to fill the glass without looking up. She'd perfected the art of serving drinks without making eye contact, without inviting conversation or unwanted attention. Her long auburn hair was pulled back severely, and her gray dress was buttoned to her throat, despite the Texas heat that made the saloon feel like an oven. The evening crowd was building, and the piano player, a man called Shorty, despite being over 6 feet tall, pounded out a cheerful tune that seemed to mock her internal silence. Laughter erupted from a table of ranch hands playing poker, and Fiona flinched at the sound. Joy felt obscene, inappropriate, like shouting in a cemetery. The saloon doors swung open, and a man walked in who made even the rowdiest cowboys straighten up a bit. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of good bourbon. His hat was dusty from travel, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. He moved to the bar with purposeful strides, and Fiona felt his gaze settle on her even as she kept her eyes fixed on the glass she was filling. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice deep and warm like summer thunder. "I'll take a beer if you have it cold." Fiona nodded curtly, drawing the beer and setting it before him without a word. She turned away immediately, but his voice stopped her. "You're Mrs. Calloway, aren't you? I heard about your husband. I'm sorry for your loss." The words, meant kindly, landed like stones in still water. Fiona's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bar. "That's 5 cents, she said, her voice flat and empty. "I'm Quentin Bridger," he continued, seemingly undeterred by her coldness. "Just hired on at the Double H Ranch north of town. Figured I'd come see what Tascosa had to offer." 5 cents, Fiona repeated, still not looking at him. Quentin laid a coin on the bar, but he didn't move away. "Heard you make the best beef stew this side of the Panhandle. Any chance the kitchen is still serving?" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended, and for just a moment Fiona's eyes flicked up to meet his. She saw no mockery there, no impatience at her rudeness. Just steady interest and something that looked almost like understanding. It made her angrier than hostility would have. She didn't want understanding. She wanted to be left alone. "Maybe tomorrow, then," Quentin said easily, taking his beer and moving to a corner table. Fiona watched him go from beneath her lashes, irritated that he'd gotten under her skin even that much. The last thing she needed was some handsome cowboy thinking he could charm his way past her defenses. The night wore on in its usual pattern of noise and chaos. Fiona served drinks, collected coins, and deflected the occasional crude proposition with a coldness that most men found more intimidating than any bouncer could provide. Around midnight, when the crowd was thinning, one of the poker players, a ranch hand named Curtis, who'd had too much to drink, grabbed Fiona's wrist as she passed. "Come on, widow woman," he slurred, yanking her closer. "You can't mourn forever. Let me buy you a drink, show you some fun." "Let go," Fiona said, her voice still that same dead monotone. She'd learned that showing fear only encouraged men like Curtis. "Don't be like that," Curtis insisted, his grip tightening. "I'm being nice here. The lady asked you to let go." Quentin's voice cut through the din, and suddenly he was there, standing beside the table with that same easy stance, but now there was steel underneath the calm. "I suggest you listen." Curtis looked up, his drunken eyes trying to focus. "This ain't your business, stranger." "I'm making it my business," Quentin said simply. "Let her go, or we're going to have a problem." For a moment, the saloon held its breath. Then Curtis released Fiona's wrist with a muttered curse and turned back to his cards. Fiona stepped back, rubbing her wrist, feeling both grateful and resentful. She didn't need saving. She'd handled worse than Curtis plenty of times. "I didn't need your help," she said to Quentin, the words coming out more defensive than she'd meant them to be. "I know," he replied, surprising her. "But I figured you shouldn't have to handle everything alone all the time." Before Fiona could formulate a response, he'd returned to his corner table, leaving her standing there with a confusion of emotions she didn't want to examine. She finished her shift in silence, locked up the saloon for the night, and walked the 3 blocks to her small rented room above the general store. The Texas night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and for just a moment, Fiona let herself remember what it felt like to find beauty in things. Then she climbed the stairs, locked her door, and fell into bed with her clothes still on, too tired to dream. Quentin Bridger became a regular at the Silver Spur. He came in 3 or 4 evenings a week, always ordered the same beer, always sat at the same corner table, and always offered Fiona a polite greeting that she never returned. He didn't push, didn't pester her like some of the other men, but his presence was a constant reminder that the world kept turning whether she wanted it to or not. One Thursday evening, about 2 weeks after they'd first met, the saloon owner, a portly man named Jessup, who was more interested in profit than people, cornered Fiona in the back room. "You need to be friendlier," he said bluntly. "The customers are complaining. They don't like drinking in a place that feels like a funeral." Fiona stared at him, her jaw tight. "I serve the drinks. I don't bother anyone. That should be enough." "It's not," Jessup said, his jowls quivering with annoyance. "This is a saloon, not a library. People come here to have fun, and your sour face is bad for business. Smile more, talk to the customers, or I'll find someone who will." The threat hung in the air between them. Fiona knew she should care. She needed this job, needed the money to survive, but the idea of pasting on a false smile, of pretending to be whole when she was anything but, made her stomach turn. Still, practicality won out over pride. "I'll try," she said, the words tasting like ash. That night, she forced herself to meet customers' eyes when they ordered. She even attempted what she thought might pass for a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. One drunk cowboy laughed and said she looked like she was in pain, which wasn't far from the truth. By the time Quentin came in for his usual beer, Fiona's face ached from the unfamiliar expressions and her patience had worn thin. "Evening," Quentin said, settling onto his usual bar stool. "Rough night." "Beer?" Fiona asked, ignoring his question. "Please." He watched her pour with those observant eyes of his. "You don't have to do that, you know." "Do what?" She set the beer down harder than necessary. "Pretend to be something you're not." His voice was gentle but direct. "I've seen real smiles, and whatever that was you were doing earlier wasn't one." Fiona felt something crack inside her chest, and before she could stop herself, a sound escaped her lips. It might have been a laugh once in another life, but now it came out jagged and harsh, like glass breaking. It startled her so much that she pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Quentin didn't laugh at her, didn't look away in embarrassment. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Her laugh sounded broken when it came." He paused, then added softly, "But broken things can be fixed. We'll work on that together until it's whole." Fiona stared at him, shocked into absolute stillness. No one had acknowledged her brokenness so directly before. People either pretended she was fine or avoided her altogether, but Quentin had named the thing that lived inside her and offered what? Help, hope. She didn't know how to respond. "I don't need fixing," she finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Quentin agreed. "But maybe you need someone to remind you that you're still alive, that there's still good in the world, that your heart might be wounded but it's still beating." "You don't know anything about me," Fiona said, but there was less ice in her tone now, replaced by something that sounded almost like pain. "You're right," Quentin said, "but I'd like to, if you'll let me." Fiona wanted to say no, wanted to retreat back into her safe numbness, but something in his earnest expression made her hesitate. "Why?" she asked instead. "Because I've been where you are," Quentin said simply. "Not exactly the same, but close enough. I know what it's like to lose someone, to feel like you're walking around dead even though your body keeps moving. I know what it's like to forget what joy feels like." He took a sip of his beer. "I also know that staying in that dark place will kill you just as surely as any bullet, just slower and more painful." "How did you?" Fiona started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the question. "How did I get out?" Quentin asked. "I didn't, not all the way. But I started letting people in again, little by little. Started remembering that life is precious because it ends, not in spite of it. Started understanding that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to keep living, really living, not just surviving." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd shed since Thomas's funeral. She blinked them back furiously. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice rough. "Okay," Quentin said, "but think about what I said, and maybe, if you're willing, let me take you for a walk sometime. Just a walk. Nothing more." Before Fiona could refuse, he'd finished his beer, left coins on the bar, and headed for the door. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the money, feeling like something had shifted in her carefully constructed walls. The next day was Saturday, Fiona's day off from the saloon. She usually spent it doing laundry, mending clothes, and trying not to think too much. But today she found herself restless, Quentin's words echoing in her mind. She walked through Tascosa's dusty streets, past the mercantile and the blacksmith shop, past the small church where she hadn't set foot since Thomas's funeral. The town was busy with weekend activity, cowboys in from the ranches, families shopping, children playing in the street. Normal life, continuing on without her. She found herself at the edge of town, looking out at the vast Texas plains that stretched to the horizon. The land here was brown and dry, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stubborn tree. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but there was a stark beauty to it if you knew how to look. Thomas had loved this land, had talked about buying their own ranch someday, building a life together. Those dreams had died with him, and Fiona had buried them deep, trying not to remember. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said, and she turned to find Quentin approaching on horseback. He dismounted smoothly, leading his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, by the reins. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Fiona said, which was mostly true. "I was just walking." "It's a good day for it," Quentin said. "Not too hot yet." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind some company? I was just heading back to the ranch, but I'm in no hurry." Fiona knew she should say no, should maintain her distance, but the words that came out were, "I suppose not." They walked in silence for a while, Quentin leading his horse, matching his pace to Fiona's slower steps. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised her. She'd grown so used to the aggressive silence she wrapped around herself that she'd forgotten silence could be companionable. "Tell me about him," Quentin said eventually. "Your husband, if you want to." Fiona's first instinct was to refuse, but then she found herself speaking. "His name was Thomas Calloway. He was a ranch hand at the Circle T, good with horses, better with people. He could make anyone laugh, could find the bright side of anything." Her voice caught. "He was everything I wasn't. I was always too serious, too quiet, but he said he loved that about me, said I balanced him out." "How did you meet?" Quentin asked gently. "At a church social. I just arrived in Tascosa from Missouri, running from—" She stopped, surprised she'd almost revealed that. "Running from a bad situation. Thomas was serving punch, and he spilled an entire ladle down his shirt trying to be charming. It should have been embarrassing, but he just laughed at himself, and her breath hitched. I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months." "He sounds like a good man," Quentin said. "He was the best man," Fiona said fiercely. "And he died because of a stupid argument over a card game. Someone accused him of cheating, which he would never do, and drew on him. Thomas wasn't even armed. He died in the street like—" She couldn't finish, the memory too raw even after 6 months. Quentin stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm sorry, Fiona, truly sorry. No one should have to go through that." Hearing her name on his lips did something strange to her. Most people called her Mrs. Calloway or just widow, as if she'd lost her identity along with her husband. But Quentin said her name like it meant something, like she was still a person and not just a ghost. "What about you?" she asked, surprising herself. "You said you'd been through something similar." Quentin's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I had a younger brother, Marcus. He was 19, full of dreams about making his fortune out west. We came out together from Virginia about 3 years ago. He got sick with fever on the trail, nothing dramatic, nothing violent, just sick. We were miles from any doctor, and by the time we reached a town, it was too late." He paused. "I kept thinking if I'd been smarter, faster, better, I could have saved him. Took me a long time to accept that some things are beyond our control." "Do you still feel guilty?" Fiona asked quietly. "Sometimes," Quentin admitted. "But I've learned to carry it differently. Not as a weight that drags me down, but as a reminder that life is fragile and precious. Marcus wouldn't want me to stop living because he couldn't, and I suspect Thomas wouldn't want that for you either." Fiona felt that strange, broken laugh trying to escape again, and this time she let it come. It sounded awful, more like a sob than anything resembling humor, but Quentin just smiled at her encouragingly. "That's a start," he said. "Not a great start, I'll admit, but a start nonetheless." "It sounds terrible," Fiona said, almost apologetically. "It sounds like someone learning to feel again," Quentin corrected. "And that's never terrible, even when it's painful." They continued walking, and gradually Fiona found herself talking more. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her difficult father and her mother who died when she was young. She told him about the man she'd nearly married before Thomas, a cruel man who'd shown his true colors just in time for her to escape. She told him things she'd never told anyone, and Quentin listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just listened. By the time they returned to town, the sun was high overhead, and Fiona realized she'd spent nearly 2 hours in Quentin's company. It didn't seem possible. Time had moved strangely, expanding and contracting, and she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. "Thank you," she said as they reached the general store where she lived, "for listening." "Thank you for talking," Quentin replied. "Would you," he hesitated, seeming almost nervous, "would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just the restaurant down the street, as friends." Fiona wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to protect herself. But there was something in Quentin's patient, steady presence that made her feel like maybe, possibly, she could risk this small thing. "As friends," she repeated, as if confirming the terms. "I suppose that would be acceptable." Quentin's smile was bright enough to rival the Texas sun. "How about Wednesday? I can meet you here at 6 if that works." "Wednesday at 6, Fiona agreed, and then she hurried inside before she could change her mind. The next few days passed in a strange haze. Fiona went through her usual routines at the saloon, but her mind kept drifting to Wednesday, to the dinner she'd agreed to. Part of her wanted to cancel, to send word to Quentin that she'd changed her mind, but another part, a part that had been dormant for months, was curious, almost excited. It was a disturbing feeling. On Tuesday night, one of the other saloon girls, a kind woman named Rosie who was about Fiona's age, cornered her during a quiet moment. "You've been different lately," Rosie said, not unkindly. "Almost like you're coming back to life." Fiona didn't know how to respond to that, so she just kept wiping down the bar. "It's that cowboy, isn't it?" Rosie continued. "The tall one with the good manners, Quentin something." "Bridger," Fiona said before she could stop herself. Rosie grinned. "So you do know his name?" "Look, honey, I know you've been through hell, and I know you probably think you can never feel anything again. But that man looks at you like you hung the moon, and maybe it's time you let yourself look back." "We're just friends," Fiona said firmly. "I'm not looking for I can't, I know," Rosie said gently. "And maybe friends is all it will be, but maybe it won't, and that's okay too. You're allowed to be happy again, Fiona. Thomas would want that for you." Would he? Fiona wondered as she finished her shift. Thomas had been generous and kind, but would he want her to move on? Would he see it as a betrayal? She didn't know, and the not knowing kept her awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her tangled emotions. Wednesday arrived too quickly. Fiona spent the afternoon in a state of nervous agitation, changing her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton one that Thomas had always liked. Then she felt guilty for wearing it and almost changed again, but there wasn't time. She brushed out her auburn hair and left it down instead of in its usual severe bun, then immediately regretted that decision and started to pin it up again. She was midway through this process when someone knocked on her door. "Just a moment," she called, hastily finishing with her hair. She checked her reflection one last time. She looked pale and anxious but presentable, and opened the door. Quentin stood there in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked from the prairie. The gesture was so unexpectedly sweet that Fiona felt something loosen in her chest. "These are for you," he said, offering the flowers with an almost shy expression. "I know they're not fancy, but they're perfect," Fiona interrupted, taking them carefully. "Thank you." She set them in a tin cup with water, then grabbed her shawl. "I'm ready." The restaurant, really just a converted boarding house that served meals to the public, was busy but not crowded. The owner, a matronly woman named Mrs. Henderson, seated them at a corner table and promised to bring out her best chicken and dumplings. Fiona sat stiffly, acutely aware of the other diners watching them, probably gossiping about the widow woman having dinner with a man. "Try to ignore them," Quentin said, as if reading her thoughts. "People will talk no matter what you do. Might as well give them something worth talking about." "Is that your philosophy on life?" Fiona asked, attempting lightness. "One of them," Quentin said with a smile. "Along with work hard, treat people fair, and never bet on another man's poker hand." That surprised another one of those broken laughs out of Fiona. It still sounded wrong, jagged, and harsh, but Quentin's expression didn't change, didn't show any disgust or discomfort. "There it is again," he said encouragingly. Broken, yes, but getting stronger. We'll work on that together until it's whole. You keep saying that, Fiona said. But how? How do you fix something that feels permanently damaged? Slowly, Quentin said. And with patience. You start by remembering small joys, the taste of good food, the warmth of sunshine, the sound of rain on a roof, little things that remind you the world still has beauty in it. Mrs. Henderson arrived with their food, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. The chicken and dumplings were as good as promised, rich and savory, and Fiona realized she was actually tasting her food for the first time in months. She'd been eating to survive for so long that she'd forgotten food could be pleasurable. "Tell me about Virginia," she said, wanting to know more about this man who was slowly, carefully pulling her back into the world. "What was it like growing up there?" Quentin's face softened with memory. "Green," he said. "So green compared to here. Rolling hills, thick forests, rivers that actually had water in them year-round. My father had a small farm, nothing grand, but it was ours. He raised horses, good ones, and taught Marcus and me everything about working with them." "Is he still there?" Fiona asked. "Your father?" "No, he passed when I was 22. Heart just gave out one day while he was working in the barn. My mother had died years before, so it was just me and Marcus then. We tried to keep the farm going, but our hearts weren't in it anymore. Too many memories. That's when we decided to head west, start fresh." "Do you regret it?" Fiona asked. "Coming out here," Quentin considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I regret losing Marcus. I regret that he never got to see all the things he dreamed about. But do I regret the decision itself? No. There's a freedom out here that I never felt in Virginia. A sense that you can become whoever you want to be, that your past doesn't have to define your future." "I wish I felt that way," Fiona said quietly. "I feel like my past is all I have left." "That's because you're still standing in it," Quentin said gently. "But you can choose to step forward whenever you're ready, and you don't have to do it alone." They talked long after they'd finished eating until Mrs. Henderson started giving them pointed looks, and they realized they were keeping her from closing. Quentin paid for the meal over Fiona's protests and walked her back to the general store through streets lit by lamplight and starshine. "I had a nice time," Fiona said when they reached her door, and was surprised to realize it was true. For a few hours she'd almost felt normal, almost felt like a person instead of a wound. "So did I," Quentin said. "Could we do this again? Maybe Saturday if you're free." Fiona hesitated, then nodded. "Saturday," she agreed, "but I'll pay for my own meal this time." "We'll argue about that when the time comes," Quentin said with a grin. Then more seriously, "Thank you, Fiona, for giving me a chance, for letting me in even a little bit. I know it's not easy." "No," Fiona admitted. "It's terrifying actually, but also," she searched for the right word, "also necessary, I think. I've been frozen for so long that I forgot what it felt like to thaw." "Thawing hurts," Quentin said. "When your fingers are frozen and you warm them up, it hurts like the devil. But it means the blood is flowing again, that you're healing." Fiona nodded, understanding the metaphor. "Good night, Quentin." "Good night, Fiona." She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside and lit her lamp. The wildflowers he'd brought sat in their tin cup, already starting to wilt in the dry air, but they were still beautiful. She touched one soft petal, thinking about frozen fingers and flowing blood and the painful process of healing. Saturday came, and then Wednesday again, and then Saturday once more. A pattern developed. Quentin and Fiona had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes just walking around town with food from the bakery. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Quentin told her about the Double H Ranch where he worked, about the cattle and horses and the hard but satisfying labor. Fiona told him about her secret love of reading, about the small shelf of books in her room that were her most precious possessions. "What are you reading now?" Quentin asked one evening as they sat on a bench outside the general store, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Jane Eyre," Fiona said. "Have you read it?" "Can't say I have," Quentin admitted. "I'm not much of a reader, but tell me about it." So Fiona did, summarizing the story of the plain governess and the brooding Mr. Rochester. And as she talked, she realized she was smiling, not one of those forced grimaces from before, but a real smile, small and tentative but genuine. When she finished, Quentin was looking at her with such warmth that she felt her cheeks flush. "You should do that more often," he said. "What? Talk about books?" "Smile," Quentin said. "It transforms your whole face. You go from beautiful to absolutely radiant." Fiona felt panic flutter in her chest. "Quentin, I know," he said quickly. "I know you're not ready for anything more than friendship, and that's fine. I'm not trying to rush you. I just wanted you to know that I see you, Fiona, really see you, and what I see is worth seeing." Fiona didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. They sat like that until the sky turned from orange to purple to black, and when Fiona finally went inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in nearly a year. Hope. But with hope came fear. One night at the saloon, about 2 months after she and Quentin had started spending time together, a drifter came in who made Fiona's blood run cold. He was tall and thin with mean eyes and a cruel mouth, and when he looked at her, she saw recognition flash across his face. "Well, well," he drawled. "If it isn't little Fiona Clark, or is it Calloway now? Heard you got yourself hitched and then unhitched real quick." Fiona's hands shook as she poured his whiskey. "You're mistaken," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "No mistake," the drifter said, leaning across the bar. "I worked for your daddy back in Missouri. Remember me, Jake Sutton? I was there the day you ran off, left your poor old father all alone." "My father," Fiona said coldly, "was a drunk and a tyrant. I don't owe him anything." "That's harsh talk about family," Jake said. "But then, you always were an ungrateful girl. Your daddy would sure like to know where you ended up." It was a threat, clear and simple. Fiona's father had controlled every aspect of her life, until she'd fled at age 19, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's books. She'd built a new life in Texas, but if her father found her, he'd do everything in his power to drag her back, to punish her for the embarrassment of her escape. "How much?" Fiona asked quietly. "I'm sorry." Jake's smile was predatory. "How much money will it take for you to keep your mouth shut and move on?" Jake pretended to consider. $50 ought to do it." Fiona felt sick. She had maybe $20 saved, hoarded from her meager salary. 50 was impossible. "I don't have that much," she said. "Then I guess I'll have to write a letter to Missouri," Jake said, standing up. "Unless you can think of another way to convince me." His eyes traveled over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "Get out," Fiona said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "Get out now." "I'll be around," Jake said, tipping his hat mockingly. "You think on my offer." After he left, Fiona had to excuse herself to the back room where she dry heaved into a bucket, her whole body trembling. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful, had covered her tracks so thoroughly. But Jake Sutton's appearance proved that the past was never truly past, that you couldn't outrun your demons forever. She got through the rest of her shift on pure will. And when Quentin came in for his usual beer, she couldn't even look at him. If her father found her, if he came to Tascosa and started spreading lies about her, or worse, telling the truth about her past, Quentin would be disgusted. He'd see her differently, see all the ways she was damaged and broken and not worth his time. "Fiona." Quentin's concerned voice broke through her spiral. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, she lied, but her hands were still shaking as she poured his beer. Quentin caught her wrist gently, stilling her movement. Talk to me, what happened? Nothing, Fiona insisted. I need to get back to work. But Quentin didn't let go. Something scared you. I can see it in your eyes. Let me help. You can't, Fiona said, and she pulled away, moving to the other end of the bar. For the rest of the night, she avoided him, and when she finally locked up and headed home, she took a circuitous route to make sure no one was following her. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay awake counting her money, trying to figure out if there was any possible way to scrape together $50. She could ask Jessup for an advance on her wages, but he'd want to know why, and explaining about Jake would raise too many questions. She could try to borrow from Rosie or one of the other girls, but they were all struggling just as much as she was. There was no good solution. The next morning, Quentin was waiting outside her door when she emerged, bleary-eyed and exhausted. We need to talk, he said firmly. And before you tell me to go away, I'm not going to. I care about you, Fiona, and something is clearly wrong. Let me help. You can't help, Fiona said again, but there was less conviction in her voice now. She was so tired of carrying everything alone. Try me, Quentin said. Please. So she told him. She told him about her father, about the abuse and control, about her escape to Texas. She told him about Jake Sutton and his threat, about the money she didn't have. And as she talked, she waited for Quentin's expression to change, for him to realize she was more trouble than she was worth. But Quentin's expression didn't change, except to grow harder when she described her father's treatment of her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. $50, he finally said. I know it's a lot, Fiona said miserably. I'm trying to figure out. I'll give you the money, Quentin interrupted. Fiona stared at him. What? No, absolutely not. I can't take your money. Why not? Quentin asked reasonably. I have it. I've been saving my wages and I don't need much. If $50 will make this problem go away, then it's the easiest solution. I could never pay you back, Fiona protested. I don't want you to, Quentin said. I want you to be safe. I want you to be free from this bastard's threats. That's payment enough. Fiona felt tears welling up, and this time she didn't fight them. They spilled down her cheeks, and Quentin pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried for the first time since Thomas's death. She sobbed into his chest, releasing months of pent-up grief and fear and exhaustion, and Quentin just held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soothing nonsense. When the storm finally passed, Fiona pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, Quentin said. You needed that, and for what it's worth, I'm honored you trusted me enough to let me see it. I'll pay you back, Fiona insisted. I don't know how or when, but I will. We'll argue about that later, Quentin said, echoing his words from their first dinner. Right now, let's go find this Jake Sutton and settle this. They found Jake at the boarding house where he was staying. Quentin did most of the talking, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made it clear Jake would be wise not to argue. He handed over the $50, and Jake counted it with greedy fingers. Pleasure doing business with you, Jake said, pocketing the money. Then he looked at Fiona. You did all right for yourself, girl, trading up from that Calloway fellow to this one. Quentin's hand shot out, grabbing Jake by his shirt front. Listen carefully, he said, his voice deadly quiet. You're going to leave Tascosa today. And if I ever hear that you've bothered Miss Fiona again, or if you've contacted her father, I will hunt you down and make you regret it. Do we understand each other? Jake, to his credit, looked genuinely frightened. Yes, sir. I understand. Good. Quentin released him with a slight shove. Now get out of my sight. They watched Jake scurry away, and Fiona felt something inside her settle. The threat wasn't completely gone. Her father could still find her through other means, but this immediate danger had been neutralized. "Thank you," she said to Quentin, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Quentin said. "That's what people do when they care about each other. They help." The word hung in the air between them. Care. It was more than friendship, and they both knew it, but Fiona still wasn't ready to name what was growing between them. It felt too much like a betrayal of Thomas, even though another part of her knew that was irrational. Over the next few weeks, Fiona found herself spending more and more time with Quentin. He'd started teaching her to ride she'd never learned properly, having been kept isolated on her father's farm, and she discovered she loved the freedom of it, the wind in her hair, and the powerful animal beneath her. Quentin was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes, always encouraging her to try again. One Sunday, he took her out to the Double H Ranch to meet his boss and see where he worked. The ranch was impressive, sprawling across thousands of acres of Texas prairie, with hundreds of cattle and dozens of horses. The boss, a gruff man named Harold Hutchins, looked Fiona over with shrewd eyes. "So you're the woman who's got Quentin smiling like a fool," Harold said. "About time he found someone. He's been moping around here like a kicked dog for too long." "I haven't been moping," Quentin protested. "Sure you have," Harold said cheerfully, "but you're better now, that's good. A man needs something to work for besides just a wage." He turned to Fiona. "You ever think about ranch life, Miss Calloway?" I don't know," Fiona admitted. "I've never really considered it." "Well, consider it," Harold said. "Quentin here is one of my best hands. I'd hate to lose him if he decided to move on, but I'd understand if he wanted to start his own place someday. Man with his skills could do well for himself." The comment was pointed, clearly hinting at a future that included Fiona, and she felt panic rise in her throat. But Quentin just laughed and changed the subject, showing her around the ranch and introducing her to the other hands. Everyone was friendly and respectful, and by the end of the day, Fiona felt more relaxed than she had in months. As they rode back to town in the golden light of evening, Quentin said, "I'm sorry if Harold made you uncomfortable. He means well, but he has all the subtlety of a stampeding bull." "It's all right," Fiona said. "I know people are talking about us. It's inevitable in a town this size." "Does it bother you?" Quentin asked. "The talk," Fiona thought about it. "Less than I expected," she admitted. I think I'm starting to care less about what other people think and more about what I want." "And what do you want?" Quentin asked quietly. It was the question Fiona had been avoiding, but sitting there on her horse with the sunset painting the world gold and Quentin beside her looking at her with those warm, patient eyes, she found she had an answer. "I want to stop being afraid," she said. "I want to stop living in the past. She took a breath. "I want to be happy again. I want to remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it." "You deserve that," Quentin said. "You deserve all of that and more." "But I don't know how," Fiona confessed. "Every time I start to feel something good, I feel guilty. Like I'm betraying Thomas or like I don't deserve to be happy when he's dead." "Can I tell you something?" Quentin asked. "When Marcus died, I felt the same way. Every moment of joy felt wrong, like I was spitting on his grave. But then I realized that Marcus loved life more than anyone I've ever known. He found joy in everything: sunrises, good coffee, a well-trained horse. And I knew, deep in my bones, that he wouldn't want me to stop experiencing those things just because he couldn't anymore. He'd want me to live twice as hard to have joy enough for both of us." "How do you know that?" Fiona asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Because that's what love does," Quentin said simply. "Real love wants the other person to be happy, even if we're not there to see it. I never knew Thomas, but from everything you've told me, he loved you deeply. And I have to believe he'd want you to heal, to find joy again, to have a full life even if he couldn't be part of it. A broken sound escaped Fiona's throat, and this time when Quentin reached for her hand, she held on tight. They rode the rest of the way back to town in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of understanding and tentative hope. That night, alone in her room, Fiona pulled out the photograph she kept hidden in her dresser drawer. It was from her wedding day, her and Thomas standing stiffly in their best clothes, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling. She studied his face, trying to imagine what he would say if he could see her now. "I think I'm falling in love again," she whispered to the photograph. "And I don't know if that makes me a terrible person. I don't know if you'd forgive me." She traced his face with one finger. "But I can't keep living in this frozen place, Thomas. I'm so tired of being numb. I'm so tired of just surviving." The photograph, of course, didn't answer. But as Fiona looked at Thomas's smile, she remembered something he'd told her once, not long after they were married. They'd been talking about the future, about growing old together, and Fiona had said something about how she couldn't imagine life without him. "Don't say that," Thomas had said, his expression serious. "If something happens to me, I want you to promise you'll keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. Promise me you'll find happiness again." She'd laughed at him then, told him nothing was going to happen, that they had decades ahead of them. But now his words came back to her with the weight of prophecy. He'd known somehow that life was fragile, and he'd tried to give her permission to go on without him. "All right," she said to the photograph, to the memory of the man she'd loved. "I'll try. I'll really try." She put the photograph away and extinguished her lamp. And for the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't cry herself to sleep. The change in Fiona was gradual but unmistakable. She started smiling more at the saloon, actually engaging in small talk with customers instead of just serving drinks in frigid silence. Jessup even pulled her aside one evening to say he'd noticed the improvement and was pleased. Rosie, the kind saloon girl, gave her a knowing look and a wink. But the most significant change was in how Fiona felt about Quentin. She'd stopped trying to keep him at arm's length, stopped pretending that what was between them was just friendship. She caught herself thinking about him during the day, looking forward to their dinners with an anticipation that felt like butterflies. When he smiled at her, her heart did strange gymnastics in her chest, and when he took her hand or touched her arm, she felt warmth spread through her entire body. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One evening in late October, when the air had finally cooled and autumn was asserting itself even in the Texas Panhandle, Quentin took Fiona on a picnic. They rode out to a spot near the Canadian River where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water still low from the dry summer burbled over rocks. Quentin had packed cold chicken, fresh bread, and even a small jar of preserves, and they ate sitting on a blanket while the horses grazed nearby. "I have something to tell you," Quentin said when they'd finished eating. He sounded nervous, which was unlike him. Fiona felt her stomach clench. "What is it?" "Harold offered me a partnership," Quentin said. "Not a full one, I don't have nearly enough money for that, but a small stake in the ranch. He's getting older and wants to start bringing in younger partners who can eventually take over. It's a good opportunity, maybe the best I'll ever get." "That's wonderful," Fiona said, and she meant it. "You deserve it, you work so hard." "There's more," Quentin said. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing nervous circles on her palm. "Part of the agreement is that I'd build a house on the ranch property, put down real roots, and he paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I don't want to do that alone, Fiona. I want to do it with you." Fiona's breath caught. "Quentin, I know it hasn't been that long," Quentin continued quickly. "And I know you're still healing. But I love you, Fiona. I think I've loved you since the first moment I saw you behind that bar, looking like you were holding the world together through sheer will. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your intelligence and your dry humor. I love the way you're fighting your way back to life, even when it scares you. I love everything about you, and I want to build a future with you if you'll have me." Fiona felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming emotion, of fear and hope and love all tangled together. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I've been so afraid to admit it, afraid of what it means, afraid of betraying Thomas's memory. But I do. I love you, Quentin Bridger, and I want that future with you." Quentin's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yeah, yeah," Fiona said, laughing through her tears, and this time the laugh didn't sound broken. It was still a little rough around the edges, still learning how to be whole again, but it was real and genuine and full of joy. Quentin pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and Fiona kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "We'll work on that laugh together until it's whole," he murmured. "We'll work on everything together." "Together," Fiona agreed, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something beautiful. They were married in December in the same small church where Thomas was buried. Some people thought it was morbid, but Fiona felt it was important. She was honoring her past while stepping into her future, acknowledging that both were part of who she was. Rosie stood up with her, and Harold was Quentin's best man, and the ceremony was simple and brief and perfect. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the Silver Spur. Jessup had closed the saloon for the afternoon and laid out a spread of food and drink. The ranch hands from the Double H came, as did many of the townspeople who'd watched Fiona's transformation from ghost woman to blushing bride. Even Mrs. Henderson from the restaurant was there, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You did good, girl," Rosie said, hugging Fiona tightly. "I'm so happy for you." "Thank you," Fiona said, "for everything, for being kind to me even when I didn't deserve it." "Everyone deserves kindness," Rosie said firmly, "especially when they are hurting. Now go dance with that husband of yours before he wears a hole in the floor with his pacing." Fiona laughed a real laugh, whole and bright, and went to find Quentin. He was talking with Harold, but his eyes lit up when he saw her approach. He held out his hand and she took it, letting him lead her to the makeshift dance floor where Shorty was playing a waltz on the piano. They danced together, Quentin's hand warm at her waist, and Fiona felt something she hadn't felt in over a year, complete. Not because Quentin had fixed her or saved her, but because he'd given her the space and support to fix herself, to remember who she was beneath the grief and fear. "Happy?" Quentin asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Ridiculously happy," Fiona admitted. "Almost suspiciously happy, like I should be waiting for something terrible to happen." "Nothing terrible is going to happen," Quentin said firmly. "We're going to have a wonderful, boring, gloriously ordinary life together. We'll raise horses and maybe some kids if you want. We'll grow old and gray. We'll be so happy it'll make people sick." Fiona laughed again, and the sound was pure music. "That sounds perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." They moved into the house Quentin had built on the Double H property in January of 1882. It was a modest structure, just 3 rooms plus a small kitchen, but it was solid and well made, and Fiona loved it immediately. She hung curtains in the windows and arranged her small collection of books on a shelf Quentin built for her. She planted an herb garden near the kitchen door, even though it was winter and nothing would grow until spring. She was planning for the future, believing in tomorrow, and it felt miraculous. The work on a ranch was hard and never-ending, but Fiona found she didn't mind. She learned to help with the horses, discovering she had a natural touch with the nervous ones. She learned to cook for the ranch hands during busy seasons, making huge pots of stew and baking enough bread to feed an army. She learned to mend tack and darn socks and all the small domestic skills that kept a household running. But more than the work, she loved the life she and Quentin were building together. They talked for hours every evening, sitting on their small porch and watching the sun set over the prairie. They made love with a passion and tenderness that made Fiona feel treasured and alive. They laughed together, real laughter that came from joy rather than politeness. They argued occasionally, as all couples do, but they always worked through it, never going to bed angry. In March, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but had been afraid to hope, afraid of jinxing it somehow. When the doctor confirmed it, she cried with happiness, and Quentin spun her around the small exam room, laughing like a madman. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to be parents. Are you scared?" Fiona asked that night as they lay in bed, Quentin's hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," Quentin admitted, "but also excited and grateful. Grateful for you, for this life, for the chance to build a family." "Me too," Fiona said. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned that would never happen, and felt a pang of sadness. But it was a gentle sadness now, nostalgic rather than crushing. She would always love Thomas, always carry him in her heart, but she'd learned that the heart was capable of holding multiple loves, multiple stories, without diminishing any of them. The pregnancy was difficult. Fiona was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep anything down. Quentin worried constantly, hovering over her like a nervous hen, until she finally snapped at him to give her some space. He'd looked so hurt that she immediately apologized, and they'd laughed about it afterward, about the absurdity of two people learning to navigate this new phase of life. As her belly grew, Fiona found herself thinking more and more about her own mother, who died when Fiona was only 7. She had so few memories of her: a kind voice, gentle hands, the smell of lavender, and she wished desperately that she could ask her mother's advice, could learn from her experience. But she couldn't, so instead she talked to Mrs. Henderson and Rosie and the other ranch wives, gathering wisdom where she could find it. In November of 1882, almost exactly a year after she'd married Quentin, Fiona gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Fiona thought she might not survive it. But finally, after nearly 20 hours, the baby arrived, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, and Quentin, who'd refused to leave Fiona's side despite social convention, let out a whoop of joy. "A son," he said, taking the baby carefully when the doctor offered him. "We have a son." Fiona, exhausted and exhilarated, watched her husband hold their child with such tenderness that her heart swelled to bursting. "What should we name him?" she asked. Quentin looked at her, his eyes shining with tears. "I was thinking Marcus Thomas. Marcus for my brother, Thomas for your first husband, so we carry them both forward with us, honor them both." Fiona felt tears slide down her cheeks. "That's perfect," she said. "Marcus Thomas Bridger. Come here, let me hold him." Quentin placed the baby in her arms, and Fiona looked down at her son's tiny face, marveling at this new life they'd created. He had Quentin's dark hair and her nose, and his eyes, when he blinked them open, were that indeterminate newborn blue that might change to anything. "Hello, Marcus," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." The years passed in the way years do when you're happy too quickly. each day bleeding into the next in a blur of work and love and small domestic joys. Marcus grew from a fussy infant into a cheerful toddler who loved horses and followed Quentin around like a shadow. In 1884, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth, after Rosie, who had been such a good friend during Fiona's darkest days. And in 1887, another son arrived, healthy and loud, whom they named James Henry after Quentin's father. The house on the Double H had to be expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Quentin built on 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room, and Harold joked that, at this rate, the Bridger family would take over the entire ranch. But he said it with affection, proud of the stable, happy family his former ranch hand had built. Fiona's relationship with her laugh continued to evolve. It grew stronger and fuller as the years passed, losing its broken quality and becoming something rich and genuine. She laughed when Marcus said something precocious, when Rose tried to feed the chickens and ended up covered in feathers, when James knocked over an entire bucket of milk and just sat in the puddle giggling. She laughed with Quentin on quiet evenings and at community gatherings and during church socials. Laughter became as natural to her as breathing, a far cry from the woman who'd forgotten how to feel joy. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Fiona still thought about Thomas. She'd visit his grave occasionally, bringing wildflowers like the ones Quentin had brought her on their first dinner. She'd tell Thomas about her life, about the children, about how happy she was, and she'd thank him for loving her, for giving her permission to move forward. She never felt guilty anymore. She'd learned that loving Quentin didn't diminish what she'd had with Thomas. It just proved that her heart was resilient, capable of healing and growing and loving again. One evening in the summer of 1889, when Marcus was nearly 7, Rose was 5, and James was 2, Fiona sat on the porch watching her children play in the yard. Quentin came and sat beside her, pulling her against his side. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Fiona said. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be." "Good different?" Quentin asked, though his smile suggested he knew the answer. "The best different," Fiona confirmed. 8 years ago, I was so broken I didn't think I'd ever be whole again. I didn't think I deserved to be whole. And then you walked into that saloon and really saw me, and refused to let me stay in that dark place. You did the hard work of healing," Quentin said. "I just reminded you that you could." "You did more than that," Fiona said. "You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You were patient when I was prickly. You gave me space to grieve while also giving me reasons to hope. You worked on my broken laugh with me until it was whole again." "It's a beautiful laugh," Quentin said, kissing her temple. "Worth every moment of patience." Marcus chose that moment to chase Rose around the yard, both of them shrieking with laughter, and James toddled after them trying to keep up. Fiona watched them, her heart full, and let out a laugh of her own, bright and clear and completely whole. "I love our life," she said to Quentin. "I love you. I love our children. I love this ranch and this town and every single ordinary moment of every single ordinary day." "Nothing ordinary about it," Quentin said. "Love is never ordinary. It's the most extraordinary thing in the world." As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Fiona leaned against her husband and watched their children play. She thought about the young widow who'd stood behind the bar of the Silver Spur Saloon, frozen and broken and convinced she'd never feel anything again. She thought about the long journey from that darkness to this light, about all the small moments of courage it had taken to choose healing over numbness, love over fear. She thought about how her laugh had sounded broken when it first came, jagged and harsh like shattering glass. And she thought about how Quentin had looked at her that evening and said they'd work on it together until it was whole. He'd kept that promise, and she'd kept her end of it too, letting him in, trusting him with her broken pieces, believing that wholeness was possible. The children ran inside for dinner, and Quentin stood, offering Fiona his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and together they went into their home, into the warm lamplight and the cheerful chaos of their family. Behind them, the prairie stretched endlessly under the darkening sky, wild and beautiful and full of promise. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a beloved book. Marcus grew tall and strong, with his father's way with horses and his mother's love of reading. Rose developed her mother's auburn hair and her father's easy confidence, charming everyone she met. James was the family clown, always finding ways to make his siblings laugh, carrying on the tradition of healing through joy that his parents had established. In 1892, Fiona gave birth to twin girls Anna Margaret and Clara Jane, who were so identical that even Quentin sometimes had trouble telling them apart. The house had to be expanded again, and Harold finally made Quentin a full partner in the ranch, acknowledging that the Bridger family had become essential to the Double HTK's success. Rosie had married a shopkeeper and moved to Amarillo, but she and Fiona wrote letters faithfully, sharing the details of their lives and their children's growth. Mrs. Henderson had passed away in 1890, but her restaurant continued under her daughter's management, and Fiona still thought of the kind woman fondly every time she made chicken and dumplings for her family. The Silver Spur Saloon had changed hands twice, and the new owner had turned it into a more respectable establishment with less drinking and gambling, and more emphasis on good food and community gatherings. Fiona occasionally stopped by when she was in town, remembering the ghost woman she'd been there, grateful for how far she'd come. Tascosa itself was changing too. The railroad had come through in 1887, bringing more settlers and more commerce. The wild, lawless edge that had characterized the town in the early 1880s had softened. There were schools now, and churches, and a proper doctor's office. The town was growing up, just as Fiona had grown up, leaving behind its rougher past while honoring the frontier spirit that had built it. In the spring of 1895, when Marcus was 12, he asked his mother about Thomas Calloway. They were sitting together mending tack, one of the countless small chores that kept the ranch running, and Marcus had been unusually quiet. "What was he like?" Marcus asked. "Your first husband." "The man I'm named for." Fiona set down the leather strap she'd been working on, giving her son her full attention. He deserved honest answers, not platitudes. "He was kind," she said. "Quick to laugh, slow to anger. He loved horses and people, and he had a gift for seeing the best in everyone." "He would have loved you, Marcus, all of you. He would have been so proud to have you carry his name." "Do you still miss him?" Marcus asked, and there was no jealousy in the question, just genuine curiosity. "Sometimes," Fiona admitted, "in the way you miss a beautiful dream when you wake up." "I loved him very much, and I grieved him terribly when he died. But that grief doesn't take anything away from the love I have for your father or for you children. The heart is bigger than we think. It can hold more than we imagine." "Papa said you were very sad when he first met you," Marcus said. "He said you'd forgotten how to laugh." "That's true," Fiona said. "I was broken after Thomas died. I didn't think I'd ever be whole again, but your father was patient with me. He helped me remember that life was worth living, that I deserved to be happy. He worked on my broken laugh with me until it was whole again." "Your laugh isn't broken now," Marcus observed. "It's my favorite sound, except maybe when Papa plays his harmonica." Fiona smiled, pulling her son into a hug. "You're growing up to be a wonderful young man," she said. "Both Thomas and your father would be so proud of you." That evening, she told Quentin about the conversation. They were in their bedroom, the children finally settled for the night, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. "He's old enough to understand," Quentin said. "Old enough to know that life is complicated, that we can love multiple people in different ways and different times." "I worry sometimes," Fiona confessed. "That maybe we named him Marcus Thomas to honor the past, but in doing so burdened him with it." "I don't think so," Quentin said thoughtfully. "I think we gave him a gift. We showed him that love doesn't die, that the people who came before us matter, that we carry them forward in the best ways we can. That's not a burden. That's a legacy." Fiona nodded, knowing he was right. Their children were growing up in a home filled with love and laughter, with stories about the uncle and stepfather they'd never met, with an understanding that the past and present could coexist peacefully. They were learning resilience and joy, learning that heartbreak wasn't the end of the story, just a chapter in a larger narrative. By 1898, Marcus was 15 and helping run the ranch alongside his father. He had a natural gift for the work, and Harold had already started talking about making him a junior partner when he turned 18. Rose was 13 and had become an accomplished rider, often racing her brother across the prairie and usually winning. James was 11 and still making everyone laugh with his antics and observations. The twins were 6, inseparable and clever, finishing each other's sentences and getting into the kind of mischief that only identical twins could manage. Fiona was 38 years old, her auburn hair threaded with silver, her face lined with years of laughter and sun. She was stronger than she'd been as a young woman, both physically and emotionally. The grief that had nearly destroyed her had refined her instead, burned away the inessential parts and left behind someone who knew her own worth, who understood that happiness was a choice you made every day, who believed in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. One evening in the late summer, the entire family gathered on the expanded porch for dinner. It was a tradition they tried to maintain whenever possible, eating together, sharing stories from their days, staying connected despite the busy demands of ranch life. Marcus told a funny story about a stubborn calf, and Rose described a new horse Harold had bought that she was desperate to train. James did an impression of one of the ranch hands that made everyone laugh until they cried. The twins tried to tell a joke but got tangled up in who was supposed to say what, which was funnier than the joke itself. Fiona watched them all, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Quentin caught her eye across the table and smiled, that warm, understanding smile that had first made her believe healing was possible. Without words, they communicated everything they needed to say. "I love you. Thank you. We did this together. We built this life from broken pieces, and look how beautiful it became." After dinner, as the children scattered to their various evening activities, Quentin and Fiona walked out to the spot where they'd had their first picnic nearly 16 years earlier. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, and the river was running higher than usual from good spring rains. They sat on the bank hand in hand, watching the water flow past. "You remember what I said that first evening at the saloon?" Quentin asked. "About your laugh, of course," Fiona said. "You said it sounded broken when it came, but that we'd work on it together until it was whole." "And did we?" Quentin asked. "Did we make it whole?" Fiona thought about the question, about all the laughter that filled their home now, about how freely joy came to her, about how the sound of her children's happiness could lift her heart even on difficult days. "We did," she said softly, "but it's more than that. You helped me understand that being broken wasn't shameful, that healing wasn't betrayal, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. You gave me permission to be human, to feel everything, the grief and the joy, the fear and the hope, the past and the present. You loved me through the worst of it, and you're still loving me through the best of it. You made it easy, Quentin said. You were always worth the patience, always worth the wait. And you did just as much healing work yourself. I just held space for you to do it. We healed each other, Fiona said. That's what love does. It makes us brave enough to face our wounds, strong enough to do the hard work, patient enough to give it the time it needs. They sat there until the sun set, turning the sky into a masterpiece of color. When they finally walked back to the house, they could hear music coming from inside, Marcus playing the harmonica Quentin had taught him, Rose singing, the other children's voices joining in. It was the sound of a family, messy and loud and absolutely perfect. Fiona paused on the porch steps, listening, and then she laughed. It was a full, rich, completely whole laugh, and it mingled with the music and the evening breeze and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. It was the laugh of someone who had been broken and had healed, who had lost and had found, who had died inside and had come back to life. Quentin put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "There it is," he said contentedly. "The most beautiful sound in the world. What's that?" Fiona asked, though she knew. "Your laugh, whole and happy and free," Quentin said. "We did good work, you and I." "We did," Fiona agreed. "The best work, and we're not done yet." They went inside together into the warm lamplight and the cheerful chaos of their family. The door closed behind them, shutting out the Texas night, and the house glowed like a beacon on the dark prairie, a testament to resilience, to love, to the healing power of patience and hope. As the years continued to pass, the Bridger family became a cornerstone of the Tascosa community. Marcus married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property in 1903, and they built a house on the far edge of the Double H, expanding the family holdings. Rose surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, and she went to Austin for training, returning 2 years later to open a school in Tascosa. James eventually bought the general store and transformed it into the most successful business in town, charming customers with the same humor that had always defined him. The twins, inseparable as ever, both married in a double wedding ceremony in 1909, causing quite a sensation in town. Through it all, Fiona and Quentin remained the steady center, the foundation upon which their children built their own lives. They grew old together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping the years with lines of laughter and love. They still took evening walks, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still found ways to make each other laugh after decades of marriage. In the spring of 1915, when Fiona was 55 and Quentin was 58, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with all 5 children, and a growing collection of grandchildren gathered around them. The original house had been expanded so many times, it was almost unrecognizable from the modest 3-room structure Quentin had built. But the heart of it remained the same, a place of love and laughter, of healing and hope. During the celebration, young Marcus, their eldest grandson, named for his father, asked his grandmother to tell the story of how she and Grandpa Quentin had met. It was a story the grandchildren never tired of hearing, each time requesting more details, more insights into the people their grandparents had been before they were just Grandma and Grandpa. Fiona settled into her rocking chair, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and began the tale. She told them about the Silver Spur Saloon, about being the ghost woman who'd forgotten how to feel. She told them about the handsome cowboy who'd seen past her coldness to the wounded woman beneath. She told them about broken laughs and patient love, about healing that happened slowly over time, about learning to honor the past while embracing the future. And then what happened? Little Anna asked breathlessly. She was 6, the age the twins had been when Fiona had so many of these same conversations with her own children. "Then we fell in love," Fiona said simply. "Not quickly, not easily, but deeply and truly. We built this life together, piece by piece, day by day. We worked on my broken laugh until it was whole, and in doing so, we made ourselves whole too." "I love your laugh, Grandma," Anna said. "It's the best laugh I ever heard." Fiona pulled the little girl onto her lap, meeting Quentin's eyes over the child's head. He was smiling that warm, patient smile she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The smile that had made her believe healing was possible, that she deserved happiness, that broken things could be made whole again with enough love and time. "I love my laugh too," Fiona said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "It took a long time and a lot of work, but it was worth it. Everything was worth it." As the celebration continued around them, with children playing and adults talking and food being passed from hand to hand, Fiona felt a profound sense of peace. She thought about the journey that had brought her here from Missouri to Texas, from grief to joy, from broken to whole. She thought about Thomas Calloway, who'd given her her first great love and her first great loss, who'd taught her what it meant to be cherished. She thought about Quentin Bridger, who'd given her a second chance at love and a lifetime of happiness, who'd showed her that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. She thought about the woman she'd been at 29, standing behind a bar with a heart full of ice and eyes that couldn't see past the next moment. That woman would never have believed she'd end up here, surrounded by children and grandchildren, laughing freely, loving deeply, living fully. That woman couldn't have imagined the reservoir of strength she carried, the capacity for joy that still existed beneath the grief, the possibility of a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. But here she was, whole and happy and grateful, with a laugh that rang clear and true, with a heart that had been broken and had healed stronger than before, with a life full of love and meaning and connection. That evening, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Fiona and Quentin sat on their porch in the rocking chairs they'd occupied for 3 decades. The Texas night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. In the distance, they could hear cattle and the occasional whinny of horses. Closer, the sound of crickets and the soft murmur of one of their children settling their own family for the night in one of the extended wings of the house. "It's been a good life," Quentin said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The best life," Fiona corrected. "Better than I ever could have imagined. Do you have any regrets?" Quentin asked, and Fiona knew he was really asking if she regretted anything about their life together, about the choice she'd made to love again. "None," Fiona said firmly. "Not a single one. I'm grateful for every moment, the hard ones and the easy ones, the sad ones and the joyful ones. All of it brought us here to this life, to this love. How could I regret any of it?" Quentin reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his advancing years. "I love you, Fiona Bridger. I've loved you since the day you tried to freeze me out with that icy stare, and I'll love you until my last breath and whatever comes after." "I love you too," Fiona said. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for working on my broken laugh with me until it was whole." "Thank you for letting me," Quentin replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to heal, to love again, to build this beautiful life with me." They sat there until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon climbed high. 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and had built a life of light together. 2 people who'd taken broken pieces and had made them whole, who'd honored grief without being destroyed by it, who'd chosen love even when love seemed impossible. Behind them, the house was full of sleeping children and grandchildren, full of love and laughter and the accumulated joy of decades. It was a home built on resilience and hope, on patience and understanding, on the fundamental belief that healing was possible and love was worth the risk. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Texas prairie and brought a new day, Fiona would wake beside the man who'd saved her by teaching her to save herself. She'd make breakfast for her extended family. She'd laugh at someone's joke. She'd work on whatever tasks the day demanded. She'd live fully and joyfully, honoring both the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become, because her laugh was whole now, and so was she. And that wholeness, hard-won and precious, was the greatest gift she'd ever received, surpassed only by the love that had made it possible. The story of Fiona and Quentin Bridger became a family legend, passed down through generations. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would tell it to their own children, keeping alive the memory of the ghost woman and the patient cowboy, of the broken laugh that became whole, of the love that healed wounds time couldn't touch. But that was in the future. In this moment, on this night, in this place they'd built together from hope and determination and love, Fiona and Quentin simply sat together, holding hands, watching the stars, grateful for every moment that had led them here. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the Texas wind, the sound of laughter rang out whole and clear and perfect.